see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Okay.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch, and this is Dialogues on How to Build a Culture of Empathy. And today I'm here with Melanie Swan. Thank you for joining me, Melanie.
Hi, Edwin. Thank you for having me on the call.
Yeah, so you're a founder of DIY Genomics, and you're doing a study about genes, I believe, genes and empathy, and I believe it's called Social Intelligence Study, Accessing Genotype, Phenotype Linkage and Optimism, Empathy, Extroversion, and Altruism.
Yes, that's right. So in general, at DIYgenomics.org is a nonprofit research group, and our objective is to do preventive medicine to link people's personal genomic profile with their current biophysical condition and any relevant interventions to help prevent the onset of conditions related to diabetes and all kinds of things. And one of the most interesting new areas in genetic research or genomic research in the last couple of years is social intelligence genomics. So this is finding links between people's personal genomic profiles and their orientation or if they're favorably disposed towards different kinds of social intelligence characteristics, such as empathy, which had attracted me to your site and your community several months ago. Empathy is one thing that's been connected with personalized genomic profiles, and also other kinds of traits like altruism, optimism, openness to new events, extroversion. And so in our studies, what we're typically doing is taking published academic studies that have found associations between the genome and these different social intelligence traits, and we're trying to see if we can replicate the results in a citizen science cohort, in a crowdsourced cohort of laypersons over the internet, and see if we find the same findings. And then further, we're also having an empathy building intervention that we're testing. So, for example, what if somebody does not have the preferential profile, that somebody's not genetically predisposed towards empathy? Well, what can you really do? And so we're testing an empathy building intervention for that as well.
Okay, so yeah, I had kind of looked it over a little bit, and for me it was somewhat technical. So what we want to do in this call is maybe go through it step by step, the study and how it works and how people can get involved and maybe the results you've had so far.
Sure, of course. We've just posted some of our early results. So we run all of our genetic studies on a health study platform called Genomira.com, Genomera.com, and that's a commercial company, and it's sort of like an eBay for health studies. And so it's free for anybody to post a health study that on any topic of interest. And so we have both laypersons interested in any kind of issue like better sleep or different kinds of health-related issues that they want to do a study with a group of people about, and also professional researchers use this platform to recruit, say, 100 crowdsourced participants to join a study. And there are right now there are almost 800 individuals in the Genomira community who have volunteered to participate in studies and potentially share their genetic data if they have it from a service like 23andMe or some other service. And then there are about 30 studies listed on the site now. The way to access it's in beta, and you can sign up directly at Genomira.com, or you can go to our website at DIYgenomics.org and click on any study from our homepage or from our studies page, and then you'll get an expedited link to actually sign up into the Genomira site. And then once you're signed up for free as a user, then you can decide to join different studies. And the way to join it, there are two different ways to join a study. You can join as a data participant, which is where you agree to share your data and participate in the online surveys and so on. Or you can join as a discussion participant. And that means you're just able to watch what's going on. You don't need to actually share any of your own data, because we realize there are different levels of participation that different people would feel comfortable with.
Yeah, I was just showing it online as you were going along here. So I
Great.
went to your website and showed the link to the empathy study,
Oh,
and
perfect.
then went through to the other site there that you mentioned.
Oh, good.
So this is like a platform that, if I understand it correctly, that people, if they're going to be involved in studies, they can just kind of sign up and kind of take
Yeah.
part and kind of contribute to general knowledge in science,
Mhm.
and use their own genome, kind of that they've they have to have gone out and have had a test already. I guess you send some swabs or something, and then you get your genome back, and then you can kind of use that somehow on this site to do studies with that.
Yeah, so on the one hand, a lot of people, over 100,000 people, have gotten their personal genome data from a service like 23andMe. It currently costs $400. And so people wondered, well, what else can I do with this information? I'd like to actually use it to participate in studies beyond what is offered on the 23andMe website. And so this, in some sense, is an answer to what else can I do with my genome if I have it. And so certainly people who have their personal genetic data can contribute that if they would like. Also, though, you don't have to have your personal genetic data to participate in these studies on the Genomira site. Not all of the studies ask for it, and you can still participate in the other portions. For example, in the empathy study, we have 2 online surveys that you don't need your genetic data to complete, and you can find out your own empathy quotient from one well-known indicator that's a standard in the industry, or also your empathy value or your empathy reading from another standardized test that's used called the IRI, the Interpersonal Reactivity Index.
So, how did that empathy test really work? I mean, that's really kind of the part that I'm really kind of
Yeah,
interested in. Is like you've got your genome then, and is it telling you things like how sensitive you are to like oxytocin or
yep.
things like that? Or
Yeah, so the academic studies, there have been several of them that have linked the oxytocin, a particular SNP in the oxytocin gene, the oxytocin receptor, how we deal with well-being, the feelings of well-being in our body and caringness for ourselves and others. And so these studies have linked a particular genotype in the oxytocin gene with being predisposed genetically towards being more empathic. And so at this particular location in the genome, people may have different genotyping values. They may be either AA, AG, or GG. And so people with the GG genotype have tended to score higher on empathy-related tests. And so far in our study, we have data from over 20 people, and we have found the same result, that people that have a GG genotype in their oxytocin gene are scoring higher on the 2 standardized empathy indicators.
is there other uh, genetic qualities that you're testing for? I mean, there's the one with the oxytocin is that, as I understand it, the way that works is if you don't have the receptor that works, that when we empathize with someone, we the body kind of we kind of get in harmony with them,
Yeah,
and that's one of the ways. And as we kind of get that in harmony, the body releases oxytocin, which is like an anti-stress
yeah,
neuropeptide, and that we start becoming calmer. We get that warm feeling, and it's also what women get when they're giving birth and nursing and so forth. So it makes us. It's kind of maybe like the reward that we get for empathy, so that we kind of develop, that this empathy is kind of nice. I want more of this. I want to foster that. And so people who don't have the receptivity to that, that they can empathize, but they don't get that warm feeling. It's kind of
Right.
like the reward, perhaps, of empathy. And so it can, as I understand it, there, like psychopaths and so forth, a lot of them don't have that receptivity to oxytocin, so they're kind of more susceptible to non-empathic ways of being. So,
Yeah.
and so that's kind of like one aspect. Do I kind of understand that
Yeah,
correctly? Or
I think that's exactly correct. Thank you for explaining it more. And I think that that's absolutely true. And so I think all of the research and what we would conclude from the genetic analysis is not that people with the non-favorable genotypes, we could not conclude that they are not empathic. Certainly, everybody has, well, with the exception perhaps of the psychopaths that you mentioned, nearly everybody has physical capacity to experience empathy. And however, the conclusion from the genetic information might be that people with the favorable genotype, this GG in the oxytocin receptor, are even more predisposed towards being empathic. It's easier for them. Maybe there's more of that physical feedback of the oxytocin in settings with other people. But certainly everybody, it's just that these people are more predisposed towards it, perhaps, as opposed to the other genotypes.
right. So if you're in an environment that's a very harsh environment and you have that low susceptibility, you might to oxytocin, you might be
Yeah.
more inclined to go in a, let's say, a psychopathic direction or something. But if you're in an environment which is very empathy rich and very nurturing, that would kind of compensate then,
Yes.
for example.
Yeah. So I think it's an interesting. And then if you know your own type, then you can also manage that. So
Hmm.
perhaps if you know you're a GG, you know you're apt to be particularly empathic, and that maybe in situations where it's not appropriate to be displaying lots of empathy or lots of sentiment, lots of feeling, that you can manage that.
Uh-huh. So for both directions, then it could be kind of just something that adds like extra information for how you are predisposed, biologically.
Right.
So is there other genetic qualities you're checking for?
Yeah,
Or?
yeah, that we're obviously focusing on empathy because of your leadership in the empathy community and our mutual interest in that area. But the other one, so the same oxytocin receptor is also associated with optimism.
Hmm.
And so people, again, with this GG genotype are more likely to be predisposed towards being optimistic as opposed to pessimistic. And I mean, perhaps some of the same the biophysiological phenomenon that happen can be related. If you have more of a sense of well-being about situations, then you may be more predisposed to be optimistic. And then some of the other things we're looking for, extroversion is another thing, and that we look at another gene called DRD2, which is also associated with risk taking and being openness to risk, being more extroverted, is sort of in the same personality genomics area. And then also altruism, and we're looking at another SNP in the COMT gene related to altruism. And that COMT SNP is also related to memory and dopamine receptors in the brain.
Hmm.
So a lot of these different kinds of genes and SNPs are very interrelated in terms of being related to the memory, to biofeedback, to general mental performance capabilities, and then fall out into these personality traits like altruism or extroversion or empathy.
Hmm. So it looks like you're doing is you're having people do a self-assessment test, like kind of just kind of a written, test of how empathic you are, and then you're comparing it to the genetic material and seeing like what the correlation is. And so far, it seems like you're seeing a correlation between the two.
So far, it's too early. We only have data on approximately 20 people, so that would be way too low to be conclusive and statistically significant. But so far, the early data has been tracking into this conclusion that people with the GG type, a GG genotype in the oxytocin receptor, have been scoring at higher levels on the empathy indicators.
So it would be kind of great to have several thousand or hundreds of thousands of people kind of do these tests, and really kind of would contribute to our understanding then of kind of the relationship of the genes and empathy, and kind of how it all interacts and works. And
absolutely, and that's exactly one of the benefits of these crowdsourced health study platforms. That yes, we've only just launched the study a couple of weeks ago, and we have data on 20 people, but we would like a minimum of 100, and really the study will just stay open indefinitely, and hopefully collect 1,000 or as many as possible. It can scale as large as possible over time, and then we have a public resource regarding these links between genetics and empathy, and generally how people are scoring on the empathy indicators and so on. And this is very much in the public venue, as opposed to these tests are used in many other academic studies, but that data is all it's not publicly accessible. The researchers analyze the results and publish the results, but it's not really a public good that anybody can see how, in general, how did 100 people score on this empathy test, and maybe even do an analysis by question and so on. So there's a tremendous opportunity afforded for health research through these crowdsourced internet models.
oh wow, so it's kind of like a wiki, like a research wiki of sorts.
Absolutely.
In that sense.
Right, so it's crowdsourced. The different levels are crowdsourced: the participation, the analysis of the results, and it's all very much a public good that's being created.
Okay, so that's like, is that the basic aspect then of the empathy component, what you just described? Is there more to it, or I was thinking we could go on to the training or the intervention or the what?
Yeah, let's talk about the intervention then next. Yeah,
Okay.
that's exactly the study where, and in general, we're looking to find if to replicate the results of academic studies and possibly extend them a little bit by looking at the genotype, the correlation between the genotypes that individuals may have and their performance on standardized test indicators.
So what are the interventions then?
Yeah, so I was somewhat disappointed when I looked at the academic studies and I saw that they stopped short. They found a link between genotype and empathy in the biophysical setting, but they didn't have any suggestions for, well, what if you think you have low empathy, or what if you aren't predisposed genetically towards empathy? What can you do about it? And so investigating some sort of an intervention was an interesting component to me. And so I wanted to, there are several other kinds of mobile apps and other tools for improving your memory, or other kinds of mental performance aspects, but I wanted to really work on this empathy problem. And to me, it's part of the bigger problem, which is chronic loneliness and unhappiness. So that some large percent of Americans experience chronic loneliness, and we have smaller households and busier lives, and many different factors contribute to this. But loneliness and unhappiness is an undesirable mental health situation in the population. And so the antidote to that, the cure for that, is all manner of happiness building kinds of activities, and including empathy. So reducing loneliness is very much a story of improving empathy for yourself and others, and feeling this helps you feel connected to others. And so with our, so there are several different, when I investigated this, there are several empathy building kinds of classes and programs and training programs. And they're offered by institutions such as Stanford. They have a C-Care seminar, and they persist over a course of months, and they're fairly in-depth. And so I was thinking, how could we deliver something very lightweight over the mobile platform and try to create a more empathic mental performance experience for individuals? So I came up with the idea of a personal virtual coach. And this is a personified character that sends you 1 to 2 text messages per day via Google Voice or Gmail. And that these are very short messages that are designed to improve empathic response. And so we have a series of these, of 20 different statements right now that we're testing. And they're very short statements. So for one example is, who could you reach out to today? So already this sets you thinking about who might you reach out to in your life. Certainly there's an emotional presupposition that who could you reach out to and support today. And the statements relate to your experience or to that of others. So and then also the personal virtual coach talks to you as if they're a person too. So one of her messages is, oh, I feel a little bit down today. And so you're very tempted to respond to her as a person and say, oh, I'm sorry to hear that, or something like that. Some of the other examples of questions or of messages are, how is your day going so far? What is good about something that you see happening now? How do you feel today? Who do you care about? Nice job on that thing that you did. And a variety of other similar kinds of messages that are designed to provide a quick empathic moment for the user.
Mm-hmm. Well, it kind of reminds me of are you familiar with George Lakoff? He's done work around a lot of work around empathy and linguistics and how the mind works. And he's saying there's kind of two major circuits within the brain. There's kind of like an empathic circuit and maybe more of a fear circuit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of it's kind of about how you're activating those different circuits. And so what I'm seeing what you're doing with your app is trying to activate in some way the empathy circuit. So when you activate it in some way, it kind of brings you into that state.
Yes.
And it brings it into your consciousness, and you can kind of exercise it and kind of deepen those neural pathways that kind of foster empathy. And I was just as I mentioned to you before we started recording, I was at Facebook, and they're doing work on using Facebook for doing conflict resolution and trying to do it in kind of an empathic way that kind of activates those empathy circuits within our brain.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really like a real cutting edge is how do we use the technology in addition to personal relationships to kind of activate those circuits and foster and nurture and kind of promote empathy in people.
Absolutely, and I was completely agreeing with you about the Facebook example. If we can set up our technology to facilitate these emotional circuits that help facilitate the way we interact with others and generally our mental performance, I think that's a tremendous use of our technologies.
Yeah. Well, one of the when I've done these interviews with people about empathy, and there's people who are making kind of their life work around fostering empathy, doing workshops around it, and I say, what kind of got you started in that? And invariably, it's like, well, I went to a workshop and I was heard like I was never heard before, in a non-judgmental way. They were able to kind of share something without someone trying to tell them how to fix it or judging them or whatever it was. So I'm kind of wondering what kind of led you to the importance of empathy and kind of be working on it.
I have had that nice experience of being in empathic listening situations, and it's completely different than 80% of our other kinds of environments we find ourselves in. But for me, it was the loneliness factor. And so I am lonely myself sometimes. And so I thought, well, what about having a virtual friend with my technology I can feel less lonely through relationships with other people. But why not try and can a computer do this too? And so that was what started me on so how can we reduce loneliness? and then improve happiness, and empathy is very much a component to that. And so I think that we have a very intimate relationship with our mobile technologies. I heard at a seminar that when you lose your wallet, it usually takes about an hour to notice, but when you lose your mobile phone, you usually notice within 5 minutes. And so this very intimate platform and this intimate interaction we have with our mobile technology means that we can do things that we weren't able to before. And I think mental health, generally, mental performance optimization, is a big, important health frontier that will be tackled with the mobile phone. So in the past, or currently, there are many reasons why individuals don't seek mental health help. There's a stigma, it's expensive, how do you find the resources? And there are many reasons that people don't seek help for mental performance optimization. But when you reframe it on the mobile platform as performance optimization, not as a disease condition or something like that, it's completely different. And that we can start to work on all manner of mental performance related kinds of things. And to me, social interaction is critical for that. And that empathy as a solution for both improved social interaction as well as reduction of loneliness and increase of happiness, to me makes sense. And so for that reason, I wanted to be testing these kinds of ideas on the mobile platform. And at the same time, already we have the example of Siri from the iPhone, that people, adults, children, all kinds of people chat with Siri as if it's just a friend. And so this is another level of that. What if you actually receive sort of more targeted mental performance improvement messaging from your Siri, from your personal virtual coach? And this, I think, can just be tremendous in improving mental performance optimization and feelings of well-being and social interaction generally.
Wow. So it was really kind of that sense of personal loneliness and kind of seeing the pain that kind of comes from that, and how empathy is maybe like an antidote or kind of a way to kind of deal with that.
Yeah. Can we make technology that makes us feel better? Yeah.
Yeah, well, it kind of reminds me of, my family is very religious. I grew up in an evangelical household, and I was just visiting. I kind of left that, I was just visiting, home and just talking with my folks about, Jesus and all that. I thought, yeah, this is really, Jesus is your friend. It's your empathy buddy in a sense. When you think of him as this being, right, that your body releases oxytocin. It's like, oh, I got a friend. I got a friend in Jesus, right? I mean, it's not for me, but I could really see how that works. Yeah. And it seems to be that technology, maybe a little bit like Siri or whatever, is kind of becomes that friend, and it can actually have a physiological effect on us.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting point. So I like the abundance mindset, so that we can get these feelings of empathy towards others from Jesus, from real individuals like yourself, have friendship here, or from our technology personified characters. And so we create more ways that we can feel good about ourselves and others. And but we should also mention, perhaps, to be there would be some boundary of carrying it too far with your virtual friends. So I think it can be very beneficial. So some people wouldn't even want to talk about it. A virtual friend is perhaps something, a mental pathology. But to the extent that we know exactly what's real or what's not, that this is a mental performance optimization tool, and I think we're savvy enough and mature enough culturally around our technology to understand this is not, exactly what the role of the virtual friend is. Then we can take advantage of the performance benefits.
So where do you see this work going in the future? What's kind of your vision for it?
Well, I would like to have 100 people in the empathy study, and then 500, and then 1,000, and continue growing that, and continue making and testing interventions on the mobile platform that help enrich people's lives, make us all feel better about ourselves, provide interaction tools for us, and mental performance improvement capabilities.
Okay, well, I'll try to get the word out about it and see if people. I would like to have the test myself. When did you find out about your test? Is it?
I'm a GG on my
Mm-hmm.
genotype, so which I hadn't known that I'm predisposed apparently towards optimism and empathy. I feel optimist, but not necessarily always empathic. And my empathy scores were also high. Um, but there may be some bias because I'm familiar with the tests and so on. So I'm perhaps not as clean of a data subject as somebody less familiar with the field.
Yeah. So yeah, I would like to know what I am too. It's
Yeah, you
yeah,
should
I've
take
done some
the
of those
test.
tests.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a little pricey. 400. Is that sort of about what it is to take
Oh,
the?
that's to get your genotype, but you can do the
Uh-huh.
online, the two online surveys, the empathy quotient and the IRI are free. You can just do it online and find out your results.
Oh yeah, yeah. I meant the gene
Yeah,
test would be kind of fun to have.
yeah, because then you'll have in fact, you'll get your data for a million different SNPs, and you can look up related to all kinds of things, health risk, response to drugs, and how your body processes caffeine and alcohol
Oh
and things
wow.
like that. Athletic performance information. Are you more predisposed to be a sprinter or an endurance athlete? How are your heart, lungs, and strength muscles, and so on? So,
Is that your main work now? Is to create this platform for this? Is that what you're kind of working on, or?
my main focus is on designing and launching studies. So we have this empathy study, and we've also recently launched a memory study looking at dopamine genes with an academic team from University of Geneva. And then we have some another big focus is on a diabetes prevention study. So if we're really to do preventive medicine, what would we want to do? And so we're thinking perhaps, what if we give 100 healthy individuals glucometers and they measure their glucose twice a day for a month? And is there any change in the way then that people think about their health and the link between how their glucose level moves during different exercise or eating regimens? So that there's a diabetes study, and then we also have some sleep studies that we'd like to look at. The genetic, there are some genes that are related to predisposition for healthy sleep, as well as caffeine consumption and sleep. So we're working together with some collaborators at Stanford on launching a sleep study. So my general focus is design and launch of preventive medicine studies involving genotype, biophysical conditions, as well as new data streams. We'd like to, for example, bring in the microbiome data. So this is the bacterial populations that are on us. So we're starting to sequence those as well, particularly in the gut, to understand how our microflora relates to our ability to deal with exposure to disease and to process vitamins and so on.
Hmm. Yeah, well, that sounds pretty fascinating. I kind of like the biology of it all, the whole mirror neurons and all the biology of it.
Uh,
I think really adds a whole new quality, takes a lot of it out of the mysticism and the philosophy and kind of adds like a scientific physiological explanation of what's going on inside of us.
yes. Do you know if anybody's done an fMRI experiment regarding empathy? So to actually characterize a biophysical profile of the experience of empathy?
There's quite a few labs now studying empathy. I just interviewed Christian Kiesers. He has a lab in Holland. He's been doing studies with psychopaths. Actually, brought in
Oh,
like 20 psychopaths from the prison
wow.
there and
Huh.
did pain studies with them.
Huh.
And he found that they actually have empathy, but that they have the ability to shut it off, turn it
Huh.
on and off,
Interesting.
as well as like Marco Iacoboni, I think
At
at
UCLA.
UCLA, and
Yeah.
there's labs. I mean, the more I look into it, the more labs I find that are kind of working on this, and I mean, there's quite a few. In Germany with Tanya Singer.
Huh.
There's Bishma Lab in at Cambridge. and a whole bunch of others. So
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. So it'd be fantastic to have that in the vein, as you suggested, of having more biological, moving this empathy, study of empathy more into the biological range, or having biological explanation, to have some sort of fMRI norm of what happens when the brain experiences empathy.
yeah. And there's the is there other biological, I mean, the other genomic factors? Like there's the one with the oxytocin, which is one that
Yeah,
you're working on. Is there other factors like that that you're aware of related to empathy?
for empathy. Not that that have been directly associated with empathy, but the other. But I think you could have a sort of the notion of it's called a haplotype profile. So with multiple genetic markers together,
Mm,
could so some of these. So if we look at the suite of genomic markers, the oxytocin, the DRD2 risk taking, the COMT related to dopamine receptors, so we could look at these a collection of these mental performance related genes together to get an overall profile. So maybe somebody's not predisposed exactly in the oxytocin receptor for empathy, but in the suite of genes related to social empathic genomic indicators, their overall profile is more positive
mm,
than others. So yeah, so I think
mm-hmm.
these it's anything in biology is very systemic. So that's why oxytocin, it's not sort of yes or no, you are empathic or not. It's not
Yeah.
binary at all. It's very much a systemic look at everything that's happening.
Well, I interviewed Paul Zak, who has the book The Moral Molecule, and he says he doesn't shake hands anymore. He only hugs. He
Yeah,
says,
you want
"I'm
to.
sorry, but I only hug." So he gives
Yep.
everybody a hug, and it's all about raising the oxytocin level. So,
Yeah. Interesting.
and when his kids do something bad, it's like he doesn't like do time out. He has a time in. You have to come and be hugged. So,
Oh, that's a nice idea. I'll have to tell my sister about that. Yeah.
yeah.
I like that.
So,
Was reminds me of Tony Robbins' seminars where you every morning you start by hugging 20 or 50 people, and it really does give you a different mental attitude towards the day.
yeah. Well, I'm thinking of starting the Church of Empathy, where we do a whole series of these kind of activities. They're all oxytocin and connection building,
Yeah,
activities and rituals, without the theology,
yeah,
but just with, it's because you need that on an ongoing basis.
yeah,
You were talking about the 8-week training, 9-week training that
yeah,
C-Care has. But
yeah,
after that's over, people need that ongoing connection, that ongoing activation of the empathy circuits, which it sounds like you're trying to do with technology, but to
yeah.
have also the in-person component there too.
Right. So I mean, individuals are emotionally rich and have the capacity for empathy, but our social structures aren't the right
Mm,
direct us away from it. So in a business meeting, it's not appropriate to be overtly, excessively empathic. And we've talked previously about the congressional empathy programs, and so how can we incorporate empathy more in our day-to-day business governmental venues in ways that are more appropriate? I think that's tricky because exactly we learned how to be empathic in the C Care program, but then I went back to my cutthroat corporate job. So
mm-hmm.
how do we change more systemically the structures of our day-to-day lives?
Well, that's the question that these dialogues are about: is how do we build a culture of empathy? So that's exactly the question, that I keep putting out there, and hoping that just creating a dialogue about it just gets us starting to even just think about it and
Yeah.
start looking how to creatively kind of answer that question. I'm wondering, do you have some ideas about that? What other ideas do you have about how do you transform that cutthroat business environment?
Yeah, one thing I've been noticing is that now to show the right kind of empathy in those more formal settings is competitively advantageous and effective. And so that I see people who are really good at um, displaying and using the right kind of empathy is even more powerful than the sort of the traditional no emotion sort of setting. So I see it creeping in a little bit as a competitive edge, and the benefit is that it is in fact a little bit more empathic. I'm not sure. I don't know. I guess another way that we start to see empathy being included more in business and governmental discussions is the consideration of the outcomes. So the outcomes need to not just be economic, but also social and environmental. And so the move towards social venture capital or corporate social responsibility, some of these sort of the way that our politically correct practices for operating business and government now include a consideration of a wider group of constituents and their environmental and social needs. And so I think that's a de facto sort of a seeping in of empathy to these venues. So maybe it doesn't come exactly with the name empathy, but the impact is that we are considering a wider group of interests of individuals.
Are you familiar with the design school at Stanford?
Yes, that's a nice
So they
one.
have a whole process and for product design, and it seems like I think the first couple steps are really about empathy. It's like how do you go out and you empathize with the people you're designing for, because your products have to fit into their world, and you really have to listen to them and take in what they're saying and kind of see the deeper needs and values that they have.
Yeah, I think that's right, that product design is including more of an empathic design process.
Yeah, and then Dev Patnaik with his book Wired to Care at Jump Associates, they're also out of Stanford. So you're right in the heart of a lot of this. They're in Palo Alto. He's saying that corporations need to have more empathy for their customers, as well as create a culture that kind of reflects their customers as well.
Yeah, customer centric, or in health, we see it as patient centric care and things like that. Yeah. So, well, it's your efforts are paying off, Edwin. Slow but sure.
Yeah, it's a real treat to chat with you about this. And is there any other components of this that you feel you'd like to share, or do you think we've kind of covered it?
I think we covered it. I appreciate the opportunity. It's always nice to talk empathy, and I'm glad that we can actually be doing something to try to move empathy forward a little bit. To give laypersons, anybody who's interested in a venue for testing their empathic response and possibly trying the mental performance intervention.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing this and taking the time to talk about it.
Yeah, thank you, Edwin.
Okay, well, with that, Melanie, I will say goodbye and hope to keep in contact with how your work progresses, and we'll try to get the word out about it as well.
Do you want me to just shoot you a quick email with the links for the couple of the links we discussed?
Okay, I did put them up here online, so I can also, we have, let me just do that quickly, your Facebook page.
Sure.
I have that here. You also have your website, melanieswan.com.
Yeah.
And I'm putting that up on the screen.
Okay.
And then your website, DIY Genomics, which I showed before. We kind of actually clicked through to the study.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate your doing
and went to Genomera, Heal the World. And there's a whole dialogue and conversation of people there kind of talking about the study.
Oh, cool. Yeah, for sure, on the study wall.
And I think you have a blog spot too, futurememes.blogspot.com.
Yeah, and I wrote about the study on there. Yeah.
Okay. Is there any other links you think are relevant?
Those are great. Thanks. I appreciate that.
Okay. Well, good.
All right.
Then I'll sign off then. Bye.
Okay, bye. Have a good weekend.
see the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.